So, welcome to this conversation about reimagining and rebuilding spiritual communities on the other side of religious deconstruction. So, I've been having these conversations with folks for a while, and as I have, several point out to me on a recurring basis how often in the course of that conversation I will emphasize again and again everything starts with the story that we tell ourselves. Everything starts with the story that we tell ourselves. And that's because stories are powerful. The internal narratives that we carry deep inside of ourselves shape our most basic instincts about everything. I did an online course, you can read all about it. And in that course, I gave an example of the way that our story about God or ultimacy impacts the kind of communities that we build. Maybe you're like a lot of folks. You don't feel as comfortable as you once did, imagining God as a being out there somewhere running the universe. For a lot of us, that story just doesn't work anymore. So in the early years of our community, I did a lesson. The title was designed, a little bit, to poke folks. When your God stops working for you, trade him in, get a new one. I'd read a book about how societies and religions in particular go through a constant process of updating how we think about, how we talk about ultimacy, that deeper reality for which the word God is a code word. So for the several weeks of the lesson, I was trying to give our community permission to imagine God differently and to experience together what cultures experience and religions and individuals when we imagine ultimacy, when we imagine God differently, when we trade our God in. It turns out new kinds of possibilities begin to emerge. So I suggested several different gods we could trade our old God in for, and one of them has been particularly meaningful to me and to our community, trading in an external God for an internal one. Now, we in the West, we owe a debt of gratitude to the Trappist monks. They have been, for all the decades since Vatican II, restoring to the West the ancient wisdom of mysticism, the ancient wisdom of contemplative practice, restoring a spirituality that is built on an internal view of the divine, a spirituality that goes way back to the desert fathers and mothers and held on to for us by our monastic communities and by our contemplatives, our mystics. An internal God, that kind of story changes us and will change our communities. Now, there are lots of stories about ultimacy, about God. There are sub-stories, there are metaphors, lots of them. But that one, the idea that God is an interior reality, has been at the core of our community's efforts to reimagine and rebuild healthy spiritual community. When ours is an out there God, far away and distant, well, of course, we feel the divine to be far away and distant. Of course we do. We feel separated from. Sometimes a little nervous about, sometimes a little bit afraid of. But when our story tells us that the divine is as close can be in us, well, it isn't that separation. Ultimacy in me, God in you. And that evokes different kinds of instincts inside of us in our lives and certainly in building our communities. Here's an example. The divine in us, that story tends to evoke a greater sense of trust. Trust that my truer, deeper self is emerging. Trust that your truer, deeper self also emerging. And I can trust you more. You can trust me more. I can trust that that indwelling reality that we all carry is awakening me and is awakening you to a deeper way of being human. Well, that will change how we build our communities. Once we shed our sense of apartness from the divine, we also shed our sense of apartness from one another, because change our stories changes us. Changing our stories also changes the role that our leaders play in spiritual community. I'm imagining many of you are leading your spiritual communities. When God is far away, leaders often feel the pressure to act as agents of that faraway God to keep the people on the straight and narrow. That's the church I grew up in, maybe you too. But again, change the story, and that stops being the job. It's not our job as leaders to watch over our people and straighten them out when they mess up. It's not our job when somebody does mess up to sequester them in order to protect the community from their failure, especially if they mess up around sex or drugs or divorce, or if they're gay, or if their child is, or if they doubt the one and true belief about this or that. Now, letting go of that role for our leaders, that is really a good thing, because you have probably noticed that role has run its course for a lot of folks. It's no longer helpful. It's actually become quite harmful. The leader gig can instead become helping our communities help one another attach to, awaken to what is already in us. The role can become reminding us, and then reminding us again and again, that we are, every one of us, carriers of the inner divine. And that job, it really is a lot more fun. When God is far away and the leader's role is to straighten people out, what a dreary gig. Drearier still for the folks who are in the community, because their value and their status, even their belonging, is a pretty tenuous affair. Which leaves us, the community, with some ugly options when we mess up. We can defend ourselves, defend our choices and our beliefs and our behaviors, or we can leave the community, or what often happens, we can just go quiet. We can keep our mess ups hidden away. Because belonging in a faraway God story community gets pretty conditional. In that context, we belong if. We belong if. And that's exhausting. And it's certainly not a recipe for authentic community. It's certainly not a recipe for honest community. But again, change our stories, we change everything. The role for leaders in the divine in us community is much more fulfilling. We get to help people reframe their spiritual stories. We get to help them find the divine that is already in them. We get to remind them, and then remind them again and again and again. And we can get to use these metaphors and these words to reinforce better stories. And then we get to turn it all around and use those words and those metaphors. And thankfully, a lot of authors have given us a lot of help. Now, reminding is so important because remember, thousands of years, God far away and out there. Hundreds of years, sin, our defining nature. Hundreds of years, harsh punishment, always waiting in the wings. Those stories just get deep inside of us in our guts. But a much more fulfilling role is to help our communities change their stories and then attach to the deeper reality already within them. Again, change our stories, we change everything. Okay, there's a lot about how our stories change our communities in the online course and in the book. Lots of ways that our stories impact the communities we build. I hope you'll check it out. I also hope you'll join the online community. Get to know others who are also rebuilding their spiritual communities. All the links that you need, they're all in the YouTube notes. Check it out.